New York Giants training camp is just around the corner. What better way to start off this new edition of A Giant Issue without bringing on my guy, Emory Hunt, to talk about some of the biggest position battles he's looking forward to seeing when Giants training camp start. I'm Gene Clemons. I have a giant issue. 3, 2, 1. And thank you once again, New York Giants on SI. Make sure that you go ahead and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Make sure that you download the podcast if you're listening on the podcast anywhere you get your podcast. I'm Coach Gene Clemons, joined today by the one and only Emory Hunt, football game plan, CBS Sports. Emory, how you doing, man?
Doing fine, man. Glad to be on the show.
Absolutely. Always great to connect, talk some football. I know that we are less than a couple of weeks out from the start of training camp. It'll be here before we know it. All the teams will be back, but the New York Giants, so many questions about who they're going to be or what they're going to be this year. I really wanted to take today to talk about some of the position battles. I think there's some really interesting position battles out there, and I wanted to get your opinion on them. So what's been new with you, man? What's been going on, and how are things been in the world of football game plan?
Things been great, man. It's football all year round on this side, just previewing college football, getting ready for college football, doing some European League of Football stuff as well, in addition to covering Canadian football. And all of it kind of rolls into, the preparation for the NFL season. So it's how you kind of use your summer to kind of get prepared for both college and pro, but also keeping tabs on what's going on in Canada and what's also going on overseas.
Yeah, and it's been interesting. European League, I've enjoyed watching and being more locked into it this year. I've done some fair share of checking out some J League stuff as well. I think that the European League has a product that only has room to grow. Some things that I've seen, I'm like a little but I think they'll figure it out as they continue to go along. The Canadian Football League is always interesting because it gives us a chance to see players that we were high on all of a sudden mature and come into their own, and now they look like studs, and you're just like, yeah, but this could have happened 5 years ago. They didn't have to wait this long, I always think that's interesting, and most of the times those things come down to position battles. You and I know that position battles aren't always decided by who's the best, right? If you remember 2022, there was supposed to be an open competition between Daniel Jones and Tyrod Taylor, and within that competition, throughout training camp, I believe that Tyrod Taylor won the job. And somehow, when we got to the first game of the year, it was Daniel Jones. And I think the excuse that was given, or the reason that was given, is that they liked the way that he dealt with somebody pushing him or something of that nature. And I was like, well, that doesn't actually have anything to do with what happens on the field, right? So as we go into 2024 training camp, why don't you give us some of the position battles that you believe will be intriguing to watch this year as we watch training camp?
I'll start there at quarterback, but I'm looking more so because we know where they stand on Daniel Jones, and to your point, where it may not be a situation where Drew Lock, who's physically better, will get the opportunity, and we still don't know when training camp starts if Daniel Jones will be ready to go in 11 on the 11 period, which he wasn't able to do during training camp. I mean, during OTAs and mini camp. So I'm more focused on, I find this to be a little bit more intriguing, the QB3 battle between Tommy DeVito and Nathan Rourke. Now, normally you don't say a QB3 battle is worth your time or whatnot, but when you look at what DeVito did last year in terms of the regular season, and Nathan Rourke and what he brings to the table, and you touched on the CFL. Well, he was a CFL most outstanding player a couple of seasons ago. Decided to take his talents to the NFL, knowing he was going to be a backup. Signed with Jacksonville. Again, significant bump in play, so you pay, so you can't argue with with the decision he made. But this is not a regular backup QB4 camp arm. I mean, this is someone that they went out and signed. We know the Giants have a couple of Canadian guys in their scouting department that were born in Canada. Dayball himself says he was born in Canada. So there's some ties there to where they wanted to bring Rourke in. And whether or not it is a camp arm situation, but we know we're going to see a lot of Nathan Rourke and we're going to see a lot of Tommy DeVito in the preseason and in training camp. And there's an opportunity for Rourke to win that QB3 job. So DeVito can't just rest on his laurels of what he did last season. He's going to have to really show improvement over last year. And Rourke can come into the situation and give himself a leg up because he has played high level football at the Canadian Football League level where he won the most outstanding player award. And he has the same talents that they are kind of cultivating in this quarterback room. Guys that can move, guys that can make plays on the move, guys that can play above the X's and O's. So I'm fascinated by the Tommy DeVito, Nathan Rourke competition in training camp.
And gone are the days where you just have to think about the quarterback 3 as a throwaway. The New York Giants is proof of that. They're proof, right? You lost Daniel Jones, then Tyrod Taylor goes down. That thrusted a Tommy DeVito as an undrafted free agent into work. And to his credit, and I say this in my I recently dropped a good, great, ugly on him. We had to remember that not only was he a was a rookie that nobody, including himself, believed would be playing in the game. And so for all of the negatives that he had some great positives to go along with that, but it's not good enough. And now with a guy with Rourke there, we know that he could get the job done. If you bring him in, he's going to produce. And so to your point, it's going to be important for DeVito to speed up the clock, right? Sitting back there holding the ball or not going through his progressions, missing wide open wide receivers. He won't have that luxury because he's got a veteran backing him up. He doesn't have just some other random undrafted free agent coming in to battle back there. It's interesting that you've turned your attention to the quarterback 3 because I think you and I both believe that a guy, that probably, if we were being honest, Daniel Jones, when it comes to unleashing the ball on a deep pass, is probably 4th in this list, right? Like all those other guys are willing to push it deep. And so during preseason games, especially where we won't probably see a lot of Daniel Jones, and like you said, we'll see a lot of DeVito and a lot of Rourke. It'll be interesting to see how much they purposely look to extend the vertical game to see what they have in order to open up those underneath lanes, because we feel like that's where they're going to want to live this year.
If you go and look at Rourke's preseason performance against the Cowboys when he was with Jacksonville, he was very impressive in that game that he played. I believe he started the game, or maybe he started the second half of that preseason game. So we know when you have jobs on the line, you're going to play a little bit more free. You're going to play a little bit more aggressive. So that's why this battle to me just makes it more intriguing, because you kind of know what you're going to get from Drew Lock. We probably won't see Daniel Jones at all, because it's only 2 preseason games. And again, it's all dependent on whether or not he's cleared to go 11 on 11. I know the timeline they were trending toward that during OTAs, where he was getting a lot of 7-on-7 work, a lot of individual work. He was moving around rather well. But again, that's different when you go in full 11 on 11, which he didn't do. So we'll see if training camp he's ready to go 11 on 11. So if that's not the case, then you probably are going to try to protect Drew Lock a little bit more. So we will see a heavy dose of DeVito and also Rourke. So that's why I think this battle has a chance to be a little bit more captivating this summer.
And it'll be interesting because we may not see as much of that battle in training camp practices, because that's where you'll see Daniel Jones getting most of his work. That's where you'll see, it pretty much, your 1 and 2s, they get all of the work in camp. And so it will be the preseason games where we get the opportunity to really see that thing flesh out. Give me another camp battle that you're looking forward to seeing.
I think the obvious one is in the backfield. Devin Singletary is the starter, but you have a litany of backs vying for the RB2 job. You have Eric Gray, whom they drafted last year in the 5th round. They come back this year, they draft Tyrone Tracy in the 5th round. They still have Ja'Shawn Corbin, whom they brought back when he spent a little time in Carolina. They brought him back. You signed Jacob Sailors, who was in the UFL with the St. Louis Battlehawks. And you also bring in Dante Miller, who was signed before the draft, even though he was in the draft class, because he was at the College Gridiron Showcase, a speedster out of South Carolina / Columbia. So out of all of those guys, who is going to be the RB2? And because all of them have similar skills, all can catch the ball out of the backfield, all can, run the football, within this run scheme. They don't need volume. I believe Miller and Sailors and also Tracy and Corbin, for that matter, all have kickoff return experience in their background. Some may even have punt return experience. So we know special teams is going to be a big part of it. But who's going to be the guy that's going to share time with Singletary is going to be the biggest battle to watch. As like I said, all these guys have the same skills. So we'll see, how it transpires out there on the field, because that's one of the more, intriguing battles, in my opinion, because you lose a Saquon Barkley who was do everything. But now you have, even if you want to include Singletary in this mix, he has similar skill set as all of them. So they clearly have a type they want in the backfield. So judging from 2, really RB2 and 3 are up for grabs, maybe more so RB3. But for the most part, guys like Corbin, Sailors, and Miller do have a chance to kind of raise some eyebrows. And we'll see how this plays out in that backfield.
I think the interesting thing for me on a guy like Miller and a guy like Corbin is the home run, right? Being able to hit the home run. Tracy being a guy that they look at as possibly somebody that can be a plus in the return game. But when you compound that with the receivers that they have on board, they have a lot of guys that can shake out there. And don't forget about Gunnar Olszewski, who's still there as a returner. It's not like they're going to have 4 returners on this team, So it really is going to come down to whatever that coaching staff's flavor is. Like a next man up, where you may see 3 of these guys on the roster and 1 on the street and 1 in the practice squad. And if somebody gets hurt, they just pull a guy off the street, put him on the practice squad, put the practice squad guy in the roster, and just keep moving. Because as you said, they all have similar traits. The Singletary thing is interesting. I think we've seen from Hard Knocks that he was the guy that Joe Shane zeroed in on as the guy to replace Barkley. Like he either through the way that they edited it, because the Giants have the final edit on all of these things, either through the way they had it edited, or just because he really felt strongly about it. Devin Singletary was his point. So he's going to get all of the opportunity to be good, because if he's not, it makes the move by Shane look bad. This is where I talk about position battles being interesting in. It's not always about who's the best, right? Or he's going to get the shot because it has to look like a genius move by Shane, right? The same way that Barkley's going to get a pop in Philadelphia, not just because he's playing with a better offense, but because that front office is going to have to justify paying Saquon Barkley more money than they were willing to pay some of those other backs that they've had in there over the past couple of years. But it's really interesting to have so many backs with so many question marks about how they run out of the backfield on that team. If you had to guess, if you were putting on your GM your coach cap, which one of those guys do you think shake out behind Singletary?
That's a great question. I feel like, if you just looking at how they reacted to what happened last year with Gray, they went out and drafted a guy in the 5th round, and then they signed 2 guys. So I feel like Gray, just by how the moves were made, is kind of, he has an uphill battle, despite being someone they drafted last year,
Yep.
and how quickly, if you look at them from a body type perspective, Tracy is the bigger back, and probably has a more upside because he only played running back for 1 season in college. So I would probably lean more toward Tracy being the backup. Um, so that kind of puts Gray in the mix with Corbin and also Sailors. Sailors is coming off of a long season, 10-game season, where he showed his ability as a, he can be the feature guy if need be. Miller, I think, will be more than relegated to special teams work because of his explosive speed. They can easily justify him being another return specialist. You may get 2 guys back there now with the new change of kickoff rules. So I think really we're going to kind of narrow this battle down to a Corbin, Gray, Sailors for RB3, because Tracy, based off his recent drafting, would be technically the RB2.
And that makes perfect sense. It's almost like with those 3 guys, pick your flavor, right? Pick what you're into. What's another position battle that you're looking forward to?
This one is a little bit more starter related, because I think this one is fascinating. I don't know if no one has truly talked about this. Jalen Hyatt versus Darius Slayton, because you kind of factor in Wan'Dale Robinson being a slot, him 100% healthy. He looked the part during OTAs and minicamp. We know Neighbors is going to be the number 1. Slayton is technically the number 2. But we know Hyatt is, would you move Hyatt out the slot into the slot, then take Wan'Dale off the field if Wan'Dale is ready to go? Or based off how similar they are built, how Hyatt can technically win inside and also kind of win on a perimeter, I think the battle was between Slayton and Hyatt more so than Hyatt and Robinson. And so if Hyatt can show he can be the guy that can run, sidecar to Neighbors, then based off how they didn't handle the Slayton contract, Slayton would probably be the one that's on the move because they drafted Hyatt. They drafted Wan'Dale Robinson. They drafted Neighbors. They inherited Slayton. So I think that puts him kind of, on the bubble. So that's why the battle between he and Hyatt, I feel like, is one to watch. And if Hyatt can take significant steps forward where he's not just a, hired deep ball guy, if he can round out his game a little bit more, that kind of pushes, Slayton kind of out the door. But if Slayton continues to show why he can play on the outside and be the wide receiver 2, and Hyatt hasn't really developed, in terms of caught up to where Slayton is currently, then Slayton stays around, and then now you got to rotate Hyatt in Robinson. Although Robinson can do a little bit more because he can carry the ball, he can do a lot more different things. So I think the Hyatt Slayton battle is another intriguing one to watch.
That's interesting because I've always looked at the Hyatt as an apprenticeship to Slayton, and you're essentially saying the apprenticeship might be over. Like let's just speed this process up because he technically becomes a de facto wide receiver 3 if we put him in over Slayton, because Wan'Dale Robinson is more like the wide receiver 2, even though he's in the slot.
Right, and Robinson is more of a true slot guy.
Yeah.
And you don't want to run you could put Slayton, Hyatt, and Neighbors out there as your 1, 2, and 3, but then now you just kind of, anytime you bring Robinson in, it's almost like you're alerting the defense like Robinson is going to be a factor in this play. So you kind of want to eliminate that by having him out there all the time. So that's going to be fascinating to watch throughout the whole training camp.
What do you think about the idea that Hyatt is essentially wide receiver 4 this year. And then after this year, they just say goodbye to Slayton, and now Hyatt just drops right into that Slayton spot in 2025.
It's the pressure of the front office, and you touched on it, and how they got to justify, because now it's like, hey, we talked a lot about Hyatt coming in. We drafted him, we talked him up last year. You saw glimpses of it with Tyrod Taylor when he was out there putting the ball out there, and he in a deep ball. Even DeVito was able to find Hyatt a couple times. And if we don't see him this year as a starter, why isn't Hyatt playing? And so now you're gonna have to say, well, we got 4 good receivers. Okay, then why would you draft him if you already had Slayton? Why not just re-up Slayton with a good deal and a good contract, and you could have used that position elsewhere?
Yep.
And so now it's where the front office stuff starts to bleed into the football decisions. And that's where the perception has to, you got to dance that dance if you're Joe Shane, and like, well, yes and no. I got to be honest about who's won in Dable. I got to be honest about who's won the job and who helps our team right now. But yeah, there is the draft status, the financial part of it. Even though it shouldn't matter, the best players should play, but we know that's not the case based off how certain positions shake out.
And not for nothing, they have now showed that they have a history of not bringing back players that's not a part of their regime, even if they've been successful. If we look at the last few years or the last couple of years, they said goodbye to Evan Ingram, only to watch him then go to Jacksonville and ball out. They then turned around and said goodbye to Julian Love, to watch him go and ball out, have the best season of his career in Seattle. They got rid of Leonard Williams mid-season, traded him to Seattle. He only went over there and racked up 5 sacks in the time that he was with the Seahawks. They let go of Xavier McKinney, who was a starter and everyone was a trending Pro Bowler, and let him go. Didn't even try to put something together that looked like it was going to be competitive with what the Green Bay Packers gave him, and the Packers didn't even give him a ton of money. And then obviously Saquon Barkley. So you look at all of these, with the exception of Leonard Williams, you look at all of these homegrown talents that were drafted by the Giants, the guys that should get second contracts or extensions, for all of those guys to then, that are starters, to then be shown the door, says a lot about, well, maybe they don't value Slayton the same way because Slayton's not their guy. And Hyatt has essentially been brought in to be Slayton. And that's why we weren't willing to give you the contract bump that you wanted. We gave you this bastardized, incentive laden, which we don't think you're going to make, because we're not going to throw you the ball, because we have Malik Neighbors there and Wan'Dale Robinson, who we've been force feeding the ball since last year. That's interesting. No one's been talking about Slayton not being on the team. I think everyone's talked about 2025, Slayton not being here, but you really and truly believe that there's a chance that he might be out the door before we start the season in 2024.
Especially because of the value that he, you got a guy that was the leading receiver the last 2 years, or maybe last 3 years, I believe, or 2 years, however long he's been a leading receiver. So you have some value there. He's been a starter. He's played a lot of games. So you can get maybe a late day 3 pick for a desperate team during training camp, when bodies start falling, or even early into the season.
I can just see a world right now where Slayton ends up on Kansas City, and that is scary for the world. I'll tell you that much. That is scary for the world. What's your last? I know you have one more. What's one more position battle that you are looking at right now?
Nickel corner. Drew Phillips, they drafted out of Kentucky, and Darnay Holmes, who was drafted by the last regime, but has been essentially their starter in that role since he's been with the Giants. He had some success early, but kind of tailed off, became a little bit inconsistent. But now they bring in Drew Phillips, who is physical despite his size, and a guy that they're looking at to be the starter, and they're prepping him to be the starter. But Darnay Holmes is right there, as a guy that has a lot of experience and flashed in terms of really good potential. But as with everything that we've seen over the course of the last 4 years with the Giants, that really has fallen. When the team doesn't have success, individuals get singled out in as being the reason why. So Holmes holding off Phillips, or Phillips just usurping him right out the gate. That's a battle to watch. Will Holmes just give it up to the young guy, or will Phillips be forced to, fight for that job and end up starting behind Holmes when week one hits the field?
Well, it's interesting you say that, because they've said that they are planning on trying to use Isaiah Simmons as the starting nickel and then moving him inside to play in McFadden's spot when they go dime. And that's where the real true nickel is going to come in at. And the funny part is they not only have that battle between Phillips and Darnay Holmes, but then they also brought in Herndon from Jacksonville, who spent the last 2 years playing nickel. With the movement from Flott going back to outside, I think for you hit the nail on the head. This is my most intriguing position to watch all training camp. Number one, can Isaiah Simmons cover well enough to be your early down nickel? Right? It's one thing to have him cover somebody for a play. It's another thing to have people start scheming for him to be playing there. I don't know if his change of direction is good enough to handle the elite level guys that are in the slot. Right? Now, if he can get his hands on them, then okay, he might be able to handle them, but it's hard to get your hands on those guys, when they're off the ball. Is Herndon just here as a camp guy? Do they envision him going back outside? Is Drew Phillips going to be physical enough? The one thing that we know about Darnay Holmes is physical and he's smart. And so that's why it's been so hard to get him out of the position over the past year. Remember last year, they brought Flott and they moved Flott to the starting nickel. And halfway through the season, you just started seeing Darnay Holmes back in there more and more and more, because Flott didn't have the level of physicality that you need to play that position. It's an intriguing thing to look at. One other place that I was thinking, and I want to get your opinion on it, is in the secondary at safety, where they have a bunch of dudes, but only one of them who really has been a proven guy that they could rely on in Jason Pinnock. Do you see this being this is Tyler Nubin, we're going to drop him in there, or do you see somebody else possibly having an opportunity to get in there and start early on at the safety position?
Well, it's interesting because Nubin wasn't getting a lot of reps during OTAs or the rookie mini camps or the mini camps. Belton was out there, as well as Jalen Mills, who's 40 something years old, right? Or,
175 years old.
Right, he's up there. So you saw Mills a lot. Nubin was taking the approach of they were bringing him along slowly. Obviously, they want Nubin out there because he has ball skills. So it'll be interesting to see how he ramps up, how they ramp him up during training camp. But Pinnock is someone that made a lot of plays for them last year. So, yeah, he's got one spot solidified. Also, what's interesting when you go back to the Isaiah Simmons thing, during the OTAs and minicamp, you saw a lot of Nick McLeod in there playing down closer to the box, almost like a pseudo nickel backer. Maybe that's the role where they see Simmons, because I can almost imagine Simmons is much more physical in that role than McLeod is. Because if I'm an offense, I'm running right at McLeod, and tackling, he was kind of inconsistent last year in that regard. So, safety, from a strong safety perspective, to nickel backer, to nickel defender, they're kind of like all blended in together. So you're going to see a lot of guys try to get in that rotation, but I do feel like they want Nubin to be that guy. So they have to ramp him up as they get started.
Hey, always good to talk with you. I'll be intrigued to see how some of these matchups play out. I definitely am looking forward to watching that wide receiver matchup now that you put me on to game, that it might be a change in the guard a year before I thought it would be a change in the guard. Emory Hunt, Football Game Plan, CBS Sports. Make sure that you follow him at Football Game Plan or at F-Ball Game Plan, excuse me, all over the place. Make sure you subscribe to the Football Game Plan YouTube channel. Emory, I appreciate you joining me.